Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, the UK government is building a cloud of secrets, but we have to ask, can it ever really be secure enough? Also, the FBI has rounded up and arrested 16 suspected members of the anonymous hacking group, and we'll share a story that leads us down a path that'll tell you how to be prepared if you're ever forced to decrypt your laptop. All that and more in this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. It's our 15th episode, and we recorded it on July 21st. That's a Thursday, for release on Friday, July 22nd. My name is Chris, and joining me on the Skype line, as always, is Alan. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, welcome back to TechSNAP. Now,
yes.
Episode 15 is going to take an interesting look because I think our top story is of a particular interest to people when you think about your government and how is it utilizing cloud computing and what are its plans and how could government get better and potentially even maybe a little scarier, depending on your point of view, if they had their own cloud infrastructure. So that's going to be an interesting look in this week's episode, as well as, of course, a follow-up on a few other stories. But Alan, before we roll into that, just a couple of bits of points of interest. One is I wanted to give a call out for some emails. We didn't get a lot in the last week, and so we thought we'd hold our Q&A until next week. And because we don't want to leave our Mac brothers out, I thought we'd put out a request out there to see what's going on in your world in terms of Lion. Are you upgrading? Are you having troubles upgrading? And the reason I ask is because I think it is of a technological interest. It's an interesting point in operating system history that we have a mass consumer desktop being distributed online through an app store and, being pushed down through the app store, the install starting, and it does a lot of interesting things. It actually repartitions and resizes partitions and creates a rescue partition and all these kinds of things. And I'm wondering out there, how is that working? What's the real world take on that? And if you happen to be a Mac user, are you upgrading to Lion and how's it gone? Send those in to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com and we'll cover some of those with the other Q&A. But don't stop sending in your regular questions, server questions, desktop questions, regular tech questions. Email those to us, techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com, and we'll try to cover a lot of those next week. Right, Alan?
We'll try to. Yes, we'll answer lots of questions.
And I want to say thank you to the folks on our Reddit page over at links.techsnap.tv. There's been some awesome things, including some folks on the Reddit page pointing me to a UNet Booten alternative that looks a little slicker than UNet Booten. So I'm going to take a look at that, and I want to say thanks to those guys. So if you want to get some of the tech news and maybe vote on what we should cover and put your thoughts in or even submit a link, go over to links.techsnap.tv, and that's our subreddit over there, and you can start doing that. Right, Alan?
Yep.
All right, buddy. Let's get into our first news story today because it's, like I teased at the beginning, it's kind of interesting here. It's sort of one of the first examples I've heard of a government building its own cloud to, I guess, share and collaborate better. What's the story here?
Yeah. So the UK government is using a cloud-based software as a service to share restricted documents. The interesting thing here is that it's not just regular information, it's information that is classified that they'll be sharing in this cloud. So first of all, they're not using a public cloud. They're not using like Amazon EC2 or something. They're doing their own internal private cloud. It's called the Government Secure Applications Environment, or GSAE. And the point is the system will allow civil servants, diplomats, and other government staff and officials to share documents with the secrecy level of IL3 or restricted.
Ooh, that sounds fancy.
So that's stuff with an impact level of 3 or less.
It doesn't surprise me, of course, that they're building their own infrastructure here because they have undoubtedly some sort of massive governmental restrictions and policies requirements that they have to meet in building.
Right.
Probably no vendor that meets those.
But they're using off-the-shelf software as a service at the same time.
Interesting. So they're integrating a bunch of different solutions.
The software as a service is from a company called Huddle, and they're used by big companies like HTC and Procter & Gamble and a bunch of other. So it's not, unestablished software, but it is, mass market off-the-shelf software.
They're probably already controlled by the government anyway, so the government knows they're safe to trust. When you have clients like that, why not, right? Just make a conspiracy joke. Sorry. Continue.
Yeah. So information that is marked as restricted is at a level where the release of the material will have effects such as significant distress to the individuals, right? If it's information about you, you'd much rather it didn't get out.
Yeah.
Adversely affecting the effectiveness of military operations, right? If people find out something's going to happen before it happens, it's not good. Or compromising law enforcement. right? If you find out that police have, inside people in your terrorist cell or whatever, then that's not good.
So they say it's a private cloud inside the government network, and that there's going to be they're going to add on. They're just going to keep adding on to it.
Yeah, and they're basically going to run this software as a service on their own hardware.
And they're going to just looks like they're going to expand what it's capable of over time too. It's not like just a one-time implementation.
The hardware for the cloud they're building, the government side of the infrastructure, is all being built to support up to impact level 4 or confidential information.
Oh, okay.
But the Huddle software doesn't meet all the requirements yet. But apparently Huddle's working on it, and by next year their software will meet all the government's requirements to store IL4 information.
So this is like their solution for interagency communication and sharing of information?
Yes. And so this may eventually be expanded to sharing information with other governments.
This kind of thing seems inevitable, right? That they would need to do something like this. But it also seems like what a sweet, tasty target. I mean, I'm just saying, if you're going for something, boy, if you got access to this government database cloud, I mean...
Right, and specifically, one of my questions is, how many people are going to end up having access to this? Are they going to let contractors that don't work for the government but are providing services to the government have access to this?
We've heard of many data breaches.
That happens a lot, and that's where a lot of these breaches come from, right? Is the contractors that are given access. Right, like this network may be isolated and those set up so you have to use a VPN to get in so that random people can't just poke it from the internet. But, if too many people have access to it, then it's like there was a study done a couple of years ago, and the number of people that have access to up to top secret classified stuff in the United States is over 1 million people.
Well, that is insane. That doesn't sound secret at all then.
Too many people, well, because technically in the U.S. system, top secret isn't that high of a classification.
Oh, okay.
But basically, if you're cleared for top secret, you're cleared for everything that's marked top secret, and then after that, they have the special access compartments where, they specifically decide who has access to the information. But anything classified top secret, anybody with that security clearance can read it. Right? It's kind of a blanket one as opposed to need to know type of thing.
It seems like a cloud like this would be such a target. It seems like it'd be such a target, and if somebody got that, the damage they could do.
Especially considering that once they add the confidential information to it, the effects of releasing information marked as confidential, including considerable infringement of personal liberties. Right? It means information that was never supposed to get out about you would be out. Things like that.
Like
material damage to diplomatic relations. Kind of like
that's a big one.
WikiLeaks stuff, right?
Yeah, WikiLeaks and all kinds. It'd be WikiLeaks on a whole new scale.
Right, because nothing that came through WikiLeaks was classified higher than restricted. So confidential would be plans for trade negotiations and things like that, and other things that would seriously disrupt the day-to-day life of the country. Right, so this stuff could be really
freaking me out here, Alan. You're freaking me out here a little bit. I'll be honest with you. I'm a little worried now.
One of the possible obstacles to deploying this cloud-based system is that, according to their security policies, anyone with access to this is supposed to be utilizing local disk encryption. Of different levels depending on IL3 or 4, what level of classification they have access to.
Now you sound like you're skeptical.
Supporting the infrastructure to have all these people have their local disk encrypted could be too much. And so we might see that requirement go by the wayside rather than having it be enforced. Right? Because if it's too much work to make everybody have to mass adopt encryption, then they might just lose that requirement instead of working on a solution to make sure that the computers that are accessing the information in this cloud are secure. Right? Because
if you compromise the end client and then they just use some sort of method on the machine to authenticate, and you have the host, you have that client.
If you
got it.
Just email some secretary who has access to this database an Excel sheet with a 0-day flash exploit in it, like we saw with the RSA one,
and then
you gain access to her computer.
Yep.
And then you can, keylog her credentials, get into the database, and access everything she has access to.
But the flip side,
with the restricted and confidential classification, they usually have access to everything, right? It's not compartmentalized.
Right, but the flip side is
access.
It seems also like a fantastic data sharing tool, and you have to wonder if something like this were to work and they could collaborate a little faster, maybe some of the previous tragedies could be prevented. Things that happened in the past that maybe if we had better data sharing.
Exactly.
So it's a big trade-off.
While it's necessary, it has to be done properly.
Yeah.
Right? Especially when you're dealing with restricted and confidential information.
The other thing that seems like, and of course this is just how it is for anything in these types of things, but it just seems ripe for contract abuse. You know, you get, like they mentioned how the software provider doesn't have the ability yet to support confidential level security, but they're going to have it next year. Well, of course they are. This is their fat cat contract now for the rest of that company's life, and there's companies that are just going to live off this.
Yes, and I'm sure that this product has huge vendor lock-in, like they'll never be able to use their information to some other system.
No, it's going to be completely integrated with their solution, and it's just...
and it's going to be completely locked down. And
so you just have to hope that that company can be trusted, I guess, or those companies, yeah. And then I'm sure, and this was, again, that was in the UK, but...
Yes, and one of our other stories later on talks about the same issue, basically.
I would be really surprised if something like that was implemented in the UK to not see something like that implemented in the US and probably eventually Canada, I would imagine, as well.
Yep.
So that's those kind of things where they're going to collaborate pretty quickly.
I know the Canadian government already has their own private cloud. I just don't know what they use it for.
Oh, well, that's interesting. Yeah, they probably wouldn't want to disclose that so much. I'm surprised we got this much information. I guess it's because it's still in the forming phase.
Well, also I think they have certain transparency laws, but they have to explain where they're spending all this money.
Oh, that's good. Oh, that's good. And Canada, I guess, doesn't. Sounds like us. All right, should we move on to the next story?
Yep.
It's kind of an interesting follow-up to some story threads that we've been covering since basically TechSNAP started. 16 have been arrested linked to the anonymous group by the FBI over just this last week. And I guess this a lot of this took place in different spots all around the world, but some of it in San Francisco, some of it, I believe...
They said of the 16 arrests that were in the U.S., 10 different states.
Yeah. Yeah, and I believe there was even some hunting done from other agencies outside the U.S., too. Yeah,
but those arrests were not included in the 16. There were more arrests in the UK, the Netherlands, Italy, and so on.
Sounds
Some
like a pretty
of the arrests
organized
were
strike,
related to other... Well, the arrests in Italy were related to attacks on an Italian government website.
Gotcha.
Same with the arrests in Turkey, but these 14 of these 16 were directly related to the attacks on PayPal last year when PayPal stopped accepting donations on behalf of WikiLeaks. Remember Anonymous organized a denial of service attack against them?
Yes, sir.
So of all the people that did it, they managed to identify 14 of them for using the low orbit ion cannon to...
What an adorable name.
Yes, to arrest them. And the defendants are charged with conspiracy to intentionally damage protected computers.
That's an interesting charge. So conspiracy to intentionally damage computers.
Protected computers, yes.
Huh. Wonder what classifies something as a protected computer.
Any computer that
has a firewall.
No, it's any computer where the company wants to pretend it's protected. I don't think they're...
So it's like here's a stick where you could beat a hacker, but then we made up this other imaginary stick that if you're a big company, we'll let you use. It's even meaner.
Probably.
Kind of seems like one of those things.
There's no charge for damaging a computer, so only protected computer.
Okay. So in other words, if I as a consumer were hacked, that wouldn't necessarily be considered a protected computer.
Just I think it might be,
unlucky slob.
Not. Yeah. I'm not sure. No, I'm not that familiar with the U.S. laws on it.
Yeah, well, neither apparently am
I. But a charge of intentional damage to a protected computer is punishable by a maximum of 10 years in prison and a $250,000 fine, while the conspiracy to damage a protected computer has a maximum penalty of only 5 years and $250,000.
Ah. Huh.
So they got charged with the lesser of the two, but that may be because they didn't actually manage to damage it that much.
Did you see the, and maybe I don't mean to step on your point if you're about to cover this next, but did you see that there was an associated story with this where a 13-year-old boy was, his house was, I guess they call it invaded, but he was raided by the FBI and they thought that he was part of the group that was picking away on PayPal because I guess the code they used for the low orbit ion cannon, whatever they're calling it, was posted online. He downloaded and played with it for like literally a few minutes. His ISP reported the traffic, and then they showed up at his door and seized computers and questioned them for several hours, and pretty intense. I mean, they were really looking to go after these guys.
Yeah.
I feel bad for the kid though, because he was just checking out the code. You know, he's like, I didn't really intend to do any hacking.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, how are they deciding who was
Yeah, does 2 packets make you an attacker, or does it take 1 million data packets to make you an attacker? And where do they draw the line? If you send 1 packet, are you part of the attack?
And are you relying solely on PayPal's logs of who sent the packets? Is that, good enough evidence?
And the other thing that really troubles me about that is it seems like a technological, if you're looking at it just from the standpoint of transmitted packets, if you got botted, if your machine was compromised and like an IRC bot was, or something was put on there, and you just started being part of a denial of service and you didn't even know, how are they able to differentiate that from intentional traffic? Data just looks like data.
And, I just throw on my own custom spyware that makes it look like my computer was under somebody else's control, and then I can do whatever I want and just say it wasn't me.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the open Wi-Fi access point argument, right? Oh, well,
exactly.
I didn't download that. No, I would never download that movie. I don't even like sci-fi. That must have been my neighbor. I do have that open Wi-Fi access point. People, although I don't think that's working anymore. All right, should we move on to our...
Mostly because your terms of service from your ISP says you're not supposed to do that.
Yeah, they got wise to it, didn't they? The little jerks. Should we move on to our next story?
They're just the last 2 people out of the 16. One of them was arrested and related to attacks on InfraGard, which is somehow affiliated with the FBI. You remember Anonymous taking credit for that one, or LulzSec even, I think, taking credit for that one. And the last one was a former contractor for AT&T who stole files and documents from AT&T and gave them to members of LulzSec.
I wonder what documents those were. What documents? Just some documents?
They didn't say.
Because I'm an AT&T customer, so I would like to know that.
Yes.
Just as a customer, let me know if they have all my information. Because, they have like my social security, they have my address, they have my mother's maiden.
They're supposed to tell you if that information gets out.
Yeah.
But if they can avoid that, seems like they want to.
Seems like they always manage a way to avoid telling people. All right, now the next story.
Yep.
Okay, so this one
kind of relates to the first one.
It's a little scary when you combine the two, right? Because you mentioned that government internal cloud requires hard drive encryption and probably newer hardware and things like that. And then there's a story that comes out from Computer World here that says the top general in the U.S. Defense Department says the IT department is in total Stone Age. This is Marine Corps General James Haas Cartwright. He's the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he was sharply critical of the Department of Defense's IT systems.
Well, specifically, the military and the Department of Defense use far too many proprietary systems. So they come up with the specs for some device that they need or some system they need, and some military contractor builds it and makes it proprietary and gives it to them. So it solves their one need, but it can't interoperate with other things.
I know what the vendor's purpose is, right? The vendor wants to make sure they have a lifetime contract.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so as an outrageous example of this type of thing, during the second invasion of Iraq, the Army and Marine Corps used different proprietary encrypted radios, and they were therefore unable to communicate directly with each other. And if it wasn't for the fact that Iraq is divided by a giant river and they just said, all right, the Army's got this side and the Marines have this side, they would have had all kinds of problems just because the two different
challenges
military couldn't talk to each other at all.
That's shocking. That's putting lives at risk.
Exactly. And it's just because they bought their radios from different contractors. And maybe, say, one set of radios was 5 years newer or whatever, so they had some extra feature or whatever, but they were not interoperable with the other encrypted radios.
I had a client once who I was replacing their IT person, and that IT person had sold every bit of equipment and software under his own company name, like through Microsoft licensing programs, so they didn't actually own any software directly themselves, and they paid him a monthly fee to use it, and it was illegit, and they were so locked in. He had all of their he provided their firewall hardware and had it all locked down. It was this complete package that he sold this clinic on. I'm just going to drop you in an IT infrastructure, and I think that's what happens with these military contracts. Is they all of a sudden they identify, due to a tactical situation, that they have an immediate need for something. They need a solution installed as fast as possible, and when somebody comes along and says, "We'll just give you this complete package, you just take it and you're good to go," it's a tempting offer.
Yep. And part of that is, if you keep reading the Computer World document there, it says that the typical procurement process for something in defense IT ends up being like taking a number of years instead of about the average for IT deployment would be like 18 months, but takes up to 3-4 years for something for the Defense Department, and usually ends up 90% over budget.
Listen to this quote here. He says, if you want to open up the operational flight software in an airplane, think something along the lines of 5 years and at least $300 million just to open and close the code, independent of what you want to try to do to improve it. We've got to find ways to do that better.
Exactly.
That's horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah, the chat room is kind of blown away by this as well.
You'd think, especially being the military, that they could demand to be given like the source code for any software they buy.
You'd think that would be integrated into the contract.
Yes, because you would think the military would want to audit that and other things.
And this is why I respect like NASA's approach, where NASA works really, really heavily in the open source community. So that way, when they're helping to develop something, it's taxpayer dollars that is code that other people can use, but B, they're using technologies that are interchangeable with the rest of the industry. Like, NASA is one of the few places where in the government where their back-end farm infrastructure is actually running on Linux instead of some proprietary solution. It's like they had an opportunity to build it that way, and they went that direction. And it shows because they're a little more nimble on what they can do with software-wise that you see come out from NASA.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And they said, especially now that the military started to use things like streaming video a lot more and all this stuff, they need more interoperable ways of using that and getting it to work with all their different systems.
The military
they have too many systems where they build a system to let System A communicate with System B, but then they'd have to build a separate one for A to C and yet another separate one for B to C. And end up with all these separate proprietary tools instead of...
What a kludge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Any other thoughts on that story?
He said the general places most of the blame for the problem on the procurement process, and the contractors that design their systems to be so proprietary. And then there was a related story where the federal CIO is worried about what he's calling the IT cartel, which is a small group of companies that have intimate understanding of the government's IT procurement process, and maybe also is some influence peddling going on there.
Oh, come on.
But they get a disproportionately large share of all the contracts, right? And surprise. Maybe some technologies that were more open and better suited were not chosen because this existing vendor, has some congressman in their pocket or whatever.
Sure. And of course, they can write it off as well. They're a known good vendor. They've made it. And what they'll do, the way it works, just at least from the side I've seen it being pushed by the FDIC and the bank that I worked at, was they will structure the requirements and the policies and such that really only that vendor ends up qualifying.
Exactly.
And that
when you write your requirements based on the feature sheet of the product you want to pick, it makes it hard for anybody else to compete.
And part of the wink, nod, shake, not really shaking deal here is the vendor. One of the things that the policy will state, the requirements will state, is the vendor might have to have these types of positions to manage these different types of, say, safe practices or whatever. And so that company will go out and hire those positions and just have them. So when the request for a quote comes in, they'll, one of the requirements on that request will be, do you have these positions to, PMO, blah, 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 blah. And they'll, yeah, we do have that position. And that's one of the ways they'll just they'll be one of the only qualifying vendors, regardless of what their bid is.
We saw this happen recently. Google, well, not that recently, it was a little while ago now, but Google filed an injunction to prevent, I forget which government agency, from choosing Microsoft for their email service to use Exchange because they didn't even consider Gmail.
Right. Because Google didn't qualify.
Because of the way that the requirements were written that, it's a performer process. Every couple of years, they just buy the latest version of Exchange.
Well, and as a result, I don't know if you've seen some of the news stories, but Google has massively reinvested in firms over in D.C. that lobbyist firms over in D.C. And they're really going for it. So they're basically now trying to go grease the wheels too.
Yep, and we saw the videos they put out. I think it was one of the first or second episodes of TechSNAP. We showed how they really beefed up the way and exposed the way that they secure the data. Right? If your email's in Gmail, when they go to destroy
which came out around that time, which was an obvious play to say, hey, look, we are serious about physical security.
Right, because they did the zero the drives out and then drive the piston through them and then chew them up into little bits.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of times at the high level, the big execs and stuff, they see software vulnerabilities as fixable. But if you don't have good physical security, your infrastructure's doesn't matter what your software does.
But also, just in any companies, you tend to see that the company that wins the contract is the one that takes the decision maker out for a expensive lunch or whatever.
I've attended a lot of really fancy baseball box games where you're up in the box and you get to look down and you have a bartender in there and it's all you can eat food, and it was from vendors.
Yep.
I wasn't a decision maker, so I don't know why they invited me, but it was a blast. They took like our whole department with them, and it happened a few times. And it was, I mean, I would if I didn't know any better, I would be swooned by that. And then you know what I do get as a contractor a lot from ISPs is ISPs will contact me, or when I'm at a client and I'm talking to them, they try to set me up with affiliate programs all the time, and they have local affiliate programs. Some of them, like if I get somebody on like a business T1 service, I can make $1,000 in about 3 months from that. And so it's like they really try to sweeten the deal a lot. And so you just have to actively just avoid all of that kind of stuff.
Right, but when you see this stuff, it's like, and this is how decisions get made, and people wonder why so many IT departments are crippled by bad decisions and so on.
Yeah, boy, aren't they? Any other thoughts on this story? Should we move on to this next one?
No, I think that's good.
This next story has the red light and red alarms going off in my head because I don't have anything to protect, but if I ever did, I'd be so frightened by this because I probably a lot of you have seen this story percolating throughout the week. The Department of Justice here in the U.S. has said has declared we can force you to decrypt a laptop that we seize. If this goes through, if this is allowed, this is going to be precedent setting. Don't you think, Alan?
Yep, exactly. Because no appeals court has actually ruled on this yet, but if they do, in this case, this will set the precedent for how this goes forward.
And I guess the chat room saying it's already law in the UK, which is awful.
Awesome. Well, so I don't know if the UK specifically has the Fifth Amendment that says, you know, your right to remain silent and your right to not incriminate yourself. And so if they don't have something analogous, maybe that's why. But really it comes down to what analogy you use as far as what your encryption key is.
Exactly.
Right? If your encryption key is like the key to a safe deposit box or something, or is your encryption key like a password, something that's in your mind that you can't be forced to disclose?
Now, I know we're kind of going off the rails here, but wouldn't something like TrueCrypt allows you to do hidden volumes, and you can even do it like, you could even make like pagefile.sys, and that could actually be
that's where you're going for the plausible deniability and so on, saying that why there's nothing to see here.
What you need to do is do like an encrypted volume that has like just crap in it, and you decrypt that for them, right? And then you have a hidden volume that looks like your page file or a Hibernate file or something like that. And that's your actual...
Or your best bet is to hide it in such a way that they never know that it was there. They don't know the encrypted data is there.
How would you do that?
They don't ask you for it.
How would you do that?
Well, if you're hiding it as the page file and so on, if they don't know that you have encrypted documents on there, then...
Or what about like steganography, where you embed data inside like an image file?
Yep.
And then put that inside a TrueCrypt volume?
Yep.
Yeah, the TrueCrypt system allows for you to sort of set up encryption in such a way that you could have plausible deniability, which it doesn't sound like this gal did have, and she was using TrueCrypt, it sounds like, from the story, from what I read.
And so, in this case, a woman was accused of mortgage fraud, specifically trying to gain the titles of houses that have been abandoned in order to sell them or whatever. And so the police raided her house, and they took her documents and her computer. And so basically the Department of Justice's stance is that it is in the public interest to be able to force defendants to make available unencrypted contents in circumstances like these. Because if they don't compel defendants, then it amounts to basically telling criminals, whether they be child exploitation, national security, terrorism, financial crimes, or drug trafficking, that if they just encrypt all the evidence against them, then it defeats law enforcement.
Okay, so that's the forward argument.
Yeah. But the EFF filed their amicus brief and saying supporting the rights of the defendant, particularly decrypting the data on the laptop, can be in and of itself a testimonial act. right? If you decrypt the content on a laptop, that basically proves that it's your laptop. You can no longer deny that it's your laptop, right?
Isn't that the same, though, if they make you unlock a safe?
Yeah.
I think they can do that.
Specifically, if you can try to deny that it's your laptop, then you're better off than...
Oh, yeah.
They shouldn't be able to force you to admit that it's your laptop. Because, again, that's your right to remain silent and your right not to incriminate yourself.
There's also a story that hit our Reddit page about the dude who wound up in jail because he refused to decrypt his laptop. There's already a guy in jail because of this.
Right.
And there's, I'll throw the link in the show notes here. Like, there's a forum post where his sister posted his story for him. And it's pretty scary. You have to, if you're going to use encryption, you have to now prepare for the fact that what happened, like in this gal's case, is the place she was living at was raided, and it's not like she was even stopped at an airport or something like that. They came in and got her system, and
right, because she was suspected of mortgage fraud.
Yeah.
But specifically, the other thing the EFF said was that ordering the defendant to enter an encryption password puts him in the situation that the Fifth Amendment was specifically designed to prevent, having to choose between incriminating themselves by decrypting their files, or lying under oath and saying they don't remember the password or whatever, or risking contempt of court and being thrown in jail like this guy was.
Sad. Because I see myself using encryption, at least if nothing else, for my Bitcoin wallet, right? So
yeah, and it comes up to the point of the U.S. Supreme Court has already affirmed that it can force defendants to provide fingerprints, blood samples, or voice recordings, right? So how much further is it to force you to provide your encryption key, right? But
I that's legit.
However, past rulings by the Supreme Court have also affirmed that a defendant cannot be forced to disclose the contents of their mind, like a password.
Ah, okay. There
so basically, when the Constitution was written, nobody had any idea about how this stuff would end up, right? And so it really comes down to what analogy you use to describe this to decide whether it should apply or not. And it's something that, legal scholars have been arguing back and forth about for 20 years since, the advent of publicly available encryption like PGP.
It does seem like if it's a password-based system, then you would be ordering somebody to give over something that is only...
Yeah, as long as they didn't write it down or something, then it's the content of their mind and they shouldn't be forced to give that out.
Yeah.
The prosecutors have clarified that they're not asking to be given the passphrase itself, that they would allow the defendant to enter the passphrase on the computer without anybody looking over their shoulder. If that becomes the standard for it, then when you set up your encryption system, set up a dummy password when you type it in, it destroys the data.
That's what I'm saying. Or set up an illegit volume that just has some stupid docs in it or something.
Yeah.
There you go. I decrypted that.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. What about the idea of just avoiding this altogether and using something I mentioned last week, a jungle disk and an encrypted S3 bucket? You don't keep it on your laptop at all.
Right.
And then if they get your laptop, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And then I guess they'll have to. I guess they could probably. I mean, I suppose
if they manage to use data off your laptop or something to prove that you have the jungle disk account, then they could subpoena the data from jungle disk and get your data and then ask you to decrypt it again.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
But maybe in that case, it's easier to raise reasonable doubt that it's not your data. But again, that brings it back to the EFF stance that just them forcing you to give a passphrase is you admitting that it's your data, right?
Yeah, it is.
From the EFS stance, shouldn't be allowed.
This story came from Port Forward on Reddit. I wanted to say, I guess he has it looks like his username is Port Forward Podcast. So it sounds like
this is the guy that we had on a couple weeks ago with his war story.
Our war story caller. Exactly.
Yep.
So yeah, it's cool he's on the Reddit page too, and that's made it in the show. That's awesome. Any other thoughts on that story?
No, I think we're ready for the roundup.
Okay, then, Alan, our first story in the roundup is the return of LulzSec a little bit here. I guess LulzSec is short-lived retirement. They just couldn't avoid the lulz, and they're still working with Anonymous, and they had a response. I guess the FBI made some sort of public statement in the news, and LulzSec decided to write them back, and they've posted it publicly to Pastebin. You have any thoughts on this story?
It's just kind of their manifesto printed out there, so...
I'm getting kind of bored with it, to be honest with you. It kind of seems like attention seeking at this point.
Well, it's like you said, the FBI is basically, the U.S. government in general is trying to establish this, that there's a huge problem and that they need to legislate about it.
Right.
And at the same time, the other side is in it for the lulz.
Yeah, and their statement is just...
They're basically purposely trolling everybody.
Yeah, they're just saying, we don't take ourselves too seriously, and we know you think this is bad, blow on, and so on and so forth. It's actually kind of an interesting read. Right. Of course, there'll be a link in the show notes. All right, Alan, the next one, the roundup is yours, this Sony story here.
One of Sony's insurers is seeking relief from the court to avoid having to indemnify Sony in 55 or more class action lawsuits filed against Sony so far.
55 over the whole hacking scandal, right?
Yes, over the whole hacking scandal. Basically, their insurance company is trying to say, we shouldn't have to pay for this because it was Sony's own fault.
Now,
they're lacking security that caused the problem.
Oh, interesting. So they were saying because they didn't take an adequate protection steps, we don't have to cover them.
That our insurance, we shouldn't have to pay out.
Rats. All right. The next story on the roundup, which is a good read, and I actually saw this one. I was like, whoa, that doesn't seem right. And then I saw the news story come out. TheSun.com, or the Sun news site, whatever it is, got hacked. TheSun.co.uk, I think is what it is. And they put up a image of Rupert Murdoch and said that he was dead. And they say his body was discovered. And then later on, they redirected the Sun.co.uk's website to lulzsec's Twitter feed.
Yep.
Which is kind of
well, specifically, when you went to the Sun.co.uk, it forwarded you to a different Murdoch site that they had hacked. And in there, they had the news article, including a bunch of spelling mistakes and so on.
That's adorable.
In that image there, you see moguls. There should be an apostrophe before the S.
Sure, which you would never see a newspaper make a mistake on like that.
And also, if you read down, it says he died from ingesting palladium or something.
Oh, they had some fun with it too. Isn't that great?
Yes. It's like, pick the random most expensive metal you can find and say he ate a bunch of it.
Oh, we got another anonymous story on the news roundup. I'll let you take this one out.
But specifically, again, like we've talked about a number of times before, when the hackers take out these news sites like this, it can cause, in this case, it was more obvious that it was fake.
Yeah.
And so maybe it didn't cause a giant dip in the News Corp's stock, and maybe if there was a dip, their stock was going down anyway because of the whole scandal that this was triggered by. But, it's not a good thing when these news sites get compromised like this.
Our source of information is spreading disinformation.
Especially when so many of the news sites steal stuff from each other so much.
Oh, yeah,
If you can make this show up on 2 or more news sites, then the rest of the news sites will assume it's legitimate.
I call it the news.
Post their own thing.
It's the news circle jerk machine. As soon as it starts hitting a couple sites, they all copy from each other.
Exactly.
I guess the chat room says the Sun's website often has misspelling mistakes on there too, so some of them wouldn't be too surprised. All right, this next story on the roundup is another anonymous story for you, Alan.
All right, Anonymous has hacked into a military contractor, and through that disclosed 90,000 internal email addresses. And
threw the database up on Pirate Bay at that.
Yes.
90,000. And it was a military contracting firm, a consulting firm.
Exactly.
Like we were saying earlier in the show.
So, first question is, why does random consulting firm have 90,000 email addresses?
Yeah, and I guess the second question is how can something that's just email addresses, I guess maybe unless there's passwords in there, what are you going to do with that? That's my question. What are you going to really...
Than emailing people.
Yeah. So it's not like it's like an epic breach.
Specifically things like this, that's when you get the spear phishing, right? The regular phishing attacks, but highly directed at when you know things like all these people are in the military.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Then you know who you want to target, maybe. Okay.
And maybe so that if you make it look like an email from, the internal military email system saying, you need to use this software for whatever.
And you can make it look like another good, valid email address since you have the database.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. All right, yeah, that sucks. Yep, still sucks. All right. It passed the sucks test. Good. Now, the last story on the roundup before we get into the Bitcoin blaster is one that made me sad. There's an open access advocate, and he was arrested for huge downloads. I guess he had some sort of access to a bunch of different information. It wasn't like he breached it. He had a login.
Yeah, he had legitimate access to this system called JSTOR, which is a bunch of scholarly papers that are mostly behind a paywall, but the university pays a blanket fee so that all students can have access. But he hooked up his, apparently he broke into a wiring closet to do this and set up his laptop and downloaded basically all the documents, 4.8 million or so documents. But the important thing is that he had legitimate access to the documents. Just their interface would only let him do like one at a time or whatever. And basically he's been charged and he surrendered to the police, and he's facing some pretty hefty...
Well, you know, Alan, it's a serious offense when educational material is stolen and then makes it out to the general populace because, I mean, God forbid that information be provided to the masses.
Yeah.
Without at least somebody making a... Well, as long as somebody makes a handsome profit, then right, it's okay to educate.
The whole point of scholarly papers was to publish them.
Yeah. Exactly. I guess they're claiming, based on the size, that he must have then had the intention to publicly post. But he didn't actually publicly post them.
Right. But I thought the whole point of these papers was that they be publicly posted.
Right. I mean, it seems like I always think it's funny when people get busted for pirating TV shows when they're just transmitted for free over the air anyways. It's like, so what if, unless you download like something that's like HBO, then that makes sense because that's paid content. But, you know, if I download something that would otherwise just be a wirelessly received for free, what's the big deal? What's the big deal?
It's like, yeah, I'm just PVRing it.
You want to get into the Bitcoin Blaster?
Sure.
Let's do it. All right. So the first link we have for you in the Bitcoin Blaster segment is just a kind of a neat infograph about what really Bitcoin is if you're still kind of struggling to understand.
The interesting thing is that this comes from TurboTax.
That is the really interesting thing.
That's the company that makes Quicken, isn't it?
Yeah, Intuit, and they do of course QuickBooks and Quicken and TurboTax itself, and
they own Mint.com as well.
They do now own Mint.com. They didn't originally create it, but they bought it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And they have a great infographic.
That graph there might be wrong. That one you're looking at there.
Yeah.
It showed based on the rate of mining a block every 10 minutes. I think they might have forgot that. Sometime next year, the number of Bitcoins you get for a block will drop from 50 to 25, and then again in the future drop to 10. So that graph may be wrong because it's not supposed to hit 21 million until like the year 2140 or something ridiculous.
Yeah, and they have it projected here to 2032, I think, or something like that.
Right. So I don't know that their graph is exactly right.
But the stuff that is interesting on here is one thing that they kind of interesting they call out is they are one of the things how they avoid one of the things they describe Bitcoin as is, listen to this headline here. What are Bitcoins and how do they avoid taxes? Interesting take that TurboTax or the Intuit's taking on their interpretation of Bitcoin. So I'll leave that to the viewer at home to go check that out.
But mostly, unlike regular income that you make, nobody's reporting it to the government, so you don't have to report it from your side.
Oh, right? That's one of the great things about it, Alan. Shh, don't tell anybody. Jeez, don't tell anybody. Okay, now the next link in the Bitcoin Blaster is one that I had fun with this week. This is probably, at least for the short term, the real market value, the real market for Bitcoin use. I don't know, for better or for worse.
One of the few, yep.
I think it's going to be online gambling. And to that end, a new online gambling site, I think it's like Strike Sapphire has launched, and they have 23 different online games. And when you start the account, they give you play money to play around with like $1,000 of play money or something. It's pretty generous. And then you go in, and eventually you can actually start playing poker for Bitcoins. It seems like this must be at least the immediate use for Bitcoin, right?
One of the few.
Yep. One of the few. That and awesome socks. I don't know. I played it a little bit. I just played with the funny money because I'm not allowed to actually gamble. According to Washington State, I would be going to jail if I did that. But they do give you funny money, so you can actually. I think if you want to just check it out and have fun, it's at least some good. Looks like some good work's gone into it, and it has some good sound effects. And then the last link in the Bitcoin Blaster area of the show notes to go check out is an interesting story, and it's obviously already been happening. We've seen it with botnets, but it's fun to watch and read this thread. A server admin over on seclist.org posted a story about one of his machines getting compromised, one of his servers, and as he uncovered what was going on, it turned out that somebody had compromised his system with the intention of using his box to Bitcoin mine. And then the conversation thread goes on with other sysadmins coming to me like, dude, this is happening a long time. And then people start theorizing, like, are we going to see scripts that somebody will download and it will analyze the server and say, okay, is this best going to be for a CPU miner or does this rig happen to have a GPU miner? Because there's a lot of rack mount servers out there that have like maybe like a $40, $50 ATI embedded card in them, like something integrated in the motherboard?
Yeah, I don't know that most of those would support the app engine, but some of them might.
Good question. If they did, though, if you could throw, or if it was an NVIDIA board, if you could throw a little...
Also, if it's a big enough server, if you got, like dual processor 8-core Xeons, you can get a decent hash rate out of it.
Yeah, but that'd be... So what I'm going for is that'd be noticeable. You'd notice if your server CPU was maxed out. But if you weren't using your GPUs to Bitcoin already, you might, in a big server setup, might not notice if your GPUs are running at 100% because the server's standard workload is likely to be completely unaffected by that.
Now, more interesting is if you're attacking the desktops at a big company, right? A company that has like 1,000 desktops and each one has a video card.
Attacking, dude. If you are an IT guy at a company with 1,000 desktops, I would set up some sort of login script and logout script so that at night...
Specifically, somebody in Australia got arrested for doing that at work.
Arrested?
Or arrested or fired, one of the two.
Oh, geez. See, because the thought crossed my mind, and I thought, I bet that must cross some sort of line. I can't think of any law, but I guess it'd be, I guess it'd be using their property, even if it is your employer.
Yeah, so you definitely get fired for it. I don't know.
What if you went to your boss and said, hey, boss, instead of giving me a raise, how about you let me run all the GPUs every night?
Well, another interesting thing is, especially with the example of desktops or those servers with them, is what happens if you manage to, cause that card to overheat and break it and it causes the server to go down or something.
Yeah, totally. That would be the
interesting to what happens when you physically break a computer by making it do Bitcoin mining.
Yeah, and the CPU mining produces a lot of heat on those servers. I had a small area where I had 3 servers in a rack in an enclosed room with an air conditioner, and I just thought, well, there's AC in here. I'll see what it does, and the room started to overheat. It started to get too hot.
Yeah, well, or just you stick your hand behind our Bitcoin rig with the 3 dual-slot video cards.
Yeah.
You can feel the heat.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's like,
wow,
I know. That's hot.
Yeah, well, they're running at 70 degrees Celsius or something.
Well, yeah, we keep them as, they're running about 70 degrees Celsius, one of them even up to 75, and that's in a data center, no dust, very chilled room, and the temperature is very stable. It doesn't fluctuate at all.
Yeah.
Because it's chilled water-based cooling.
Unlike my garage where I have it running, and it's like 50 degrees at night and then 80 degrees during the day. And
it's 7 or 8 very high static pressure fans to get the air through the machine.
Nice.
And it's, that's how we managed to keep it that cool. It's kind of funny.
And at those temps, it'll
70 degrees Celsius cool, but
at those temps, the fans will probably stop spinning long before the GPU gets damaged. You know what I mean? Like, you just have to monitor the fans, and then if you see fan rates slowing down, then you have to replace them. But
again, like some people in the chat room are saying, some of those botnets out there with 500,000 or a million Windows hosts, even if you only get 1 mega hash out of each one, it's 1 million mega hashes.
Well, honestly, there's sites out there already that are using that JavaScript code that uses a portion of your visitor's processor to generate coins for you.
Imagine huge malware doing the same thing.
Imagine, and it would never happen, but imagine if Facebook did it.
Yep.
Wow. Would some users?
Now,
what if
Facebook
it came to
would actually be able to get away with it too, because you're kind of expecting their site to make your computer chug.
What if you went to a website and over in the corner of the site there was a toggle switch that said turn off all ads and turn on Bitcoin generating, and in the background it would use like 15 or 10% of your CPU, but all the ads on the website would be turned off?
That could be pretty cool.
That might be cool, because then you're helping them generate revenue. I mean, you might see something like that. In fact, there's even a JavaScript code, I think, out there. I don't know how this works, but somebody said they were working on something to use OpenCL somehow. So you could even do a little GPU mining through the web browser. I don't know how that's possible, but that could be really cool. Well, Alan, I think we've kind of ran down through the rest of the whole show. It seems like it went really fast, but I think that's everything we've got for today, right?
It's been like an hour, so.
Well, look at us go. Now, you heard us mention the chat room a few times, and of course, they're always here rocking it with us, and we always say thanks to everyone who has an opportunity to join us live. We do this show over at jblive.tv at 1 p.m. Pacific, and if you can join us, we'd love to have you.
Yes.
That's 3 p.m. Eastern Time.
No, 4 p.m.
4 p.m. Eastern Time because of math. And where Alan's at right now, it's like 100 degrees, Alan, so I appreciate you.
120 degrees.
Okay, jeez. Well,
ridiculous.
Holy crap. And you had to turn off the fan to do this episode.
Exactly.
That is super hardcore.
The temperature in this room has gone up 4 degrees since we started the show.
It is brutal out here in the studio when it is hot out here because it's all the equipment and all the lights. It is a sight to be seen. You would not believe. Well, All of that said, all that sweaty talk aside, that does wrap up this week's episode of TechSNAP. Now, TechSNAP comes out on Friday mornings, and if you go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com, you will find, my friends, you will find the most succulent show notes. I mean, really, like, picture like some great, juicy baby back ribs that you just want to nom on for a while. Those are the show notes, and they're over at jupiterbroadcasting.com, as well as RSS feeds to get this show automatically in the various different formats, perhaps for your mobile device, perhaps audio only for your commute, perhaps you want it in high definition for your home entertainment system. We've got all of those, and you'll find them with their feeds over at jupiterbroadcasting.com, or just available for on-demand download. And, of course, we also have this show over on YouTube at youtube.com/jupiterbroadcasting. There's even a TechSNAP playlist you can subscribe to if you're an avid YouTube fan. So there you go.
Yep. And it's on iTunes as well, right?
It is. You can search for TechSNAP. And if you do happen to be an iTunes user, it would really be beneficial to this show if you rated and commented and subscribed in iTunes.
Yep.
It helps immensely. If we make it in that top 10 list, we probably pick up another 20,000 downloads. Yep. So that would be really helpful for the show. So if you are an iTunes user, that always helps out.
Yeah. And if you want to help make the show better, send in questions.
Yeah. TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com. And also that Reddit page is a great place to go to submit links and vote things up and leave comments, because I check that a few times a day. I'm always in there, and I'm always posting stuff as soon as I see something cool. I want to be the first one to get it on the TechSNAP page, see if I beat people. But then sometimes I go there and somebody's got me to it. I'm like, oh, that's a person to follow. That person's good. So it's a pretty fun experience. So again, that's links.techsnap.tv. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for watching this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you next Friday.